Captain Jake Morgan stared at the monitor screen in front of him and rubbed his tired eyes because 14 years of space exploration had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was seeing right now. The energy readings coming from the abandoned moon in the Andromeda sector were unlike anything in the database, and the patterns suggested intelligent design rather than natural phenomena. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Amy Brooks, stood beside him, studying the same data with a concerned expression on her face, and she had been with him for 8 years, so she knew when something was truly unusual. The rest of the crew gathered around the navigation deck waiting for their captain to make a decision. And everyone felt the tension in the air. Jake had built his reputation on being careful and methodical, but he had also made his name by being bold when the situation required it. And this was definitely one of those moments. He ordered the ship to move closer to the moon and told everyone to prepare for a landing party because whatever was down there had been waiting for a very long time. The moon itself looked dead from space with a gray surface covered in craters and no atmosphere to speak of, but the energy readings told a completely different story. As they descended through the thin atmospheric layer, Jake noticed something strange about the largest crater, and it seemed to have geometric patterns that were too perfect to be natural. The landing was smooth, and within minutes Jake led a team of 4 crew members out onto the surface wearing their protective suits and carrying scanning equipment. The ground beneath their feet felt solid, but there was a vibration that they could all sense, and it was as if the moon itself was alive and breathing. Amy walked beside Jake and pointed toward what looked like an entrance carved into the side of the crater, and the opening was surrounded by symbols that glowed with a faint blue light. Jake approached carefully and activated his scanner, but the device went haywire when it got close to the symbols, and the readings made no sense at all. Before anyone could react, 2 massive shapes emerged from the shadows on either side of the entrance, and the crew members stepped back in shock. The creatures stood at least 15 feet tall, with scales that shimmered like metal in the dim light, and wings that were folded against their backs. Jake recognized them immediately, from Earth legends and mythology. But seeing dragons in real life on an alien moon was something else entirely. The dragons did not attack, but instead watched the humans with intelligent eyes that seemed to be evaluating them and measuring their worth. Then a voice spoke in their minds, and it was clear and musical, but also carried an authority that demanded respect. The voice told them to lower their weapons and approach with peaceful intentions because the Guardian had been waiting for visitors from Earth. Jake signaled his team to comply, and slowly they moved forward toward the entrance between the 2 dragons. The creatures stepped aside, allowing them to pass, and Jake felt a strange warmth as he walked between them, as if they were scanning his very soul. Inside, the entrance was a long corridor lit by the same blue light as the symbols outside, and the walls were covered with more writing in a language none of them could read. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the corridor opened into a massive chamber. The chamber was beautiful beyond description, with crystal formations growing from the floor and ceiling that pulsed with energy, and in the center stood a figure that took Jake's breath away. She was tall and graceful, with features that were both alien and familiar at the same time, and her skin had a slight luminescent quality that made her seem to glow from within. Her hair was long and silver, flowing down her back, like a waterfall, and her eyes were a deep purple color that seemed to contain galaxies. She wore robes that looked like they were made from starlight itself, and around her neck was a pendant that matched the blue glow of the symbols outside. Jake removed his helmet because somehow he knew the air in the chamber was safe, and his crew followed his lead. The woman smiled and spoke in perfect English, though her accent was unusual and melodic. She introduced herself as Luna and explained that she was a princess of the elven people who had existed long before humans ever left their home planet. Jake felt his heart skip a beat when she spoke, and there was something about her presence that made him feel both calm and excited at the same time. Luna told them that she had been waiting on this moon for over 300 years, guarding a treasure that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. Amy asked what kind of treasure, and Luna gestured to the crystal formations around them. These crystals, she explained, contained the accumulated knowledge and power of her civilization, and they could provide unlimited clean energy and technology far beyond what humans had achieved. But Luna said there was a reason she had been hiding here for so long, and her people had foreseen a great darkness coming to the galaxy. An enemy from beyond known space was approaching, and they would destroy everything in their path, unless someone could stop them. Her people had been nearly wiped out in the first attack, and Luna had escaped with the treasure and her 2 dragon companions to keep it safe. The prophecy had told her that someone from Earth would come, and that person would be worthy to receive the treasure and use it to protect all life in the galaxy. Jake felt the weight of her words and asked why she had waited specifically for humans. Luna stepped closer to him and looked into his eyes with an intensity that made him feel exposed. She said that humans had something special in their nature, and they were young enough to still have hope but old enough to understand sacrifice. Her people had watched Earth for thousands of years, and they had seen humanity's capacity for both great evil and great good. But most importantly, they had seen that humans never gave up, even when facing impossible odds. That quality, Luna said, was what would be needed in the coming war. Jake asked when this enemy would arrive, and Luna's expression grew dark. She told him that her calculations suggested they would reach human space within 5 years, and by then it would be too late, unless preparations began immediately. The treasure she guarded could create defensive shields powerful enough to protect entire planets and weapons that could penetrate the enemy's defenses. But Luna explained that the technology would not work for just anyone, and it required someone with a pure heart and strong will to activate it. She had been sending out subtle signals for the past 14 years, hoping to attract the right person to her location. Jake asked why him specifically, and Luna smiled sadly. She said that fate had a way of bringing the right people together at the right time, and from the moment he entered the chamber, she knew he was the one the prophecy had spoken of. Amy and the other crew members watched the exchange between their captain and the alien princess, and they could all sense something deeper happening. Luna walked around Jake, studying him from different angles, and then she reached out and placed her hand over his heart. Energy flowed from her hand into his chest, and Jake gasped as images flooded his mind. He saw fleets of alien ships darker than space itself sweeping across star systems and leaving nothing but destruction behind. He saw planets burning and civilizations crumbling under the assault of weapons that defied understanding. But he also saw hope in the form of humans standing together with other alien races fighting back with Luna's technology. He saw himself standing beside Luna, leading the defense, and behind them, the 2 dragons roared their defiance at the approaching darkness. When the vision ended, Jake stumbled backward, and Amy caught him. Luna apologized for the intensity, but said he needed to see what was at stake. Jake looked at her and asked what would happen if he accepted this responsibility. Luna told him that his life would never be the same, and he would carry the burden of protecting countless lives. But she also said that he would not be alone because she would stand with him and teach him everything he needed to know. The dragons entered the chamber and moved to stand beside Luna, and she introduced them as Ember and Storm. She explained that they were not pets, but companions who had chosen to bond with her centuries ago. They would also bond with Jake if he accepted the treasure, and together they would form a connection that transcended normal understanding. Jake looked at his crew and saw trust in their eyes, and they had followed him through countless dangers, and they would follow him through this. He turned back to Luna and took a deep breath before speaking. He told her that he accepted the responsibility and would do whatever was necessary to protect humanity and the galaxy. Luna's face lit up with joy and relief, and she stepped forward and embraced him. In that moment, Jake felt something shift in the universe, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The bonding ceremony began immediately after Jake accepted Luna's offer, and she led him to a smaller chamber where the walls seemed to be made of living crystal that responded to their presence. Luna explained that the bond between them and the dragons would allow them to share thoughts and emotions across any distance, and it would also grant Jake access to the ancient knowledge stored in the treasure ember. And Storm followed them into the chamber, and their massive forms somehow seemed less threatening now that Jake had agreed to work with them. The red dragon Ember had scales that glowed like hot coals, and her eyes held an ancient wisdom that made Jake feel small and insignificant. Storm, the blue dragon, had scales that looked like ice, and his presence brought a sense of calm that balanced Ember's intensity. Luna told Jake to stand in the center of a circular pattern on the floor, and she positioned herself opposite him, while the dragons took their places on either side. Amy and the rest of the crew watched from the entrance because Luna had said they could witness the ceremony, but could not participate. Luna began to chant in a language that sounded like music and wind chimes, and the crystals in the chamber started to pulse in rhythm with her words. Energy began to flow from the crystals into the circular pattern, and Jake felt it rising up through his feet and into his body. It was not painful, but it was intense, and he could feel every cell in his body awakening to something new. The dragons added their voices to Luna's chant, and the sound became overwhelming in its beauty and power. Jake saw his life flashing before his eyes, but not as memories, and instead he saw all the choices he had made and all the paths he could have taken. He saw moments of courage and moments of doubt, and he understood that every decision had led him to this exact moment. Luna's voice grew stronger, and she reached out her hands toward him, and Jake instinctively reached back. When their hands touched, the energy in the room exploded outward, and Jake felt himself being pulled into something vast and infinite. He was no longer just himself, but part of something greater, and he could feel Luna's presence in his mind, along with Ember and Storm. Through Luna's eyes, he saw the destruction of her homeworld, and felt the grief and loss that had driven her to this isolated moon. Through Ember's ancient memories, he witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations and understood the cycle of life and death that governed the universe. Through Storm's calm perspective, he found peace in the chaos, and learned that even in darkness, there was always hope. The visions continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, and when they finally faded, Jake found himself on his knees with Luna supporting him. She was smiling, though there were tears on her face, and she told him that the bond was complete. Jake could feel it now, and there was a constant awareness of Luna and the dragons in the back of his mind, like a gentle presence that he knew would always be there. Ember stepped forward and lowered her massive head until it was level with Jake's, and she spoke directly into his mind. She told him that she had lived for over 2,000 years and had bonded with only 3 other beings in all that time. Jake was the 4th, and she would protect him with her life, just as she had protected Luna. Storm followed, and his mental voice was like a cool breeze on a hot day. He said that Jake's determination and courage had impressed him, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Luna helped Jake to his feet and explained that the bond would take time to fully develop, but he would soon be able to communicate with them telepathically from anywhere. She also said that the knowledge from the treasure would gradually integrate into his mind, and he would find himself understanding things he never studied. Amy approached cautiously and asked if Jake was all right. He assured her he was fine and actually felt better than he had in years, and there was a clarity to his thoughts that had not been there before. Luna told them all that they needed to return to Jake's ship and begin preparations for the journey to Earth. The treasure would have to be transported carefully, and Luna herself would need to accompany it, because she was bound to it by ancient magic. Jake asked how they would explain all of this to Earth's leadership, and Luna said that the truth was often simpler than any lie. They would show the Council the evidence of the coming threat and demonstrate the power of the technology. She had brought Emmy voiced the concern that everyone was probably thinking, and she asked how Earth would react to seeing 2 massive dragons. Luna smiled and said that Ember and Storm could alter their size through the same energy that allowed them to fly despite their mass. They could become as small as house cats or as large as buildings, depending on what was needed. Storm demonstrated by shrinking down to the size of a large dog, and Amy's eyes widened in amazement. Ember followed suit, and suddenly, the 2 fearsome dragons looked almost cute, though their eyes still held that same ancient intelligence. The crew spent the next several hours helping Luna gather the most important crystals from the chamber and packing them into special containers that she had prepared. Luna explained that these crystals contained the blueprints for defensive shields and energy weapons, along with medical technology that could cure diseases that plagued humanity. There were also crystals that held information about faster-than-light travel that was far more efficient than the current human method. Jake asked how much of this technology Luna was willing to share, and she told him that she would share everything. Her people had learned the hard way that hoarding knowledge only led to destruction, and if humanity was going to survive the coming war, they needed every advantage possible as they worked. Luna told Jake more about her people and their history. The elven civilization had once spanned hundreds of star systems, and they had been known throughout the galaxy as teachers and healers. But their pacifist nature had made them vulnerable when the enemy came, and they had not believed in building weapons of war. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late, and most of their worlds had fallen. The survivors scattered across the galaxy, hiding their knowledge and hoping that someday another race would be strong enough to stand against the darkness. Luna had volunteered to be one of the guardians because she had lost her entire family in the war and had nothing left but her duty. For 300 years she had lived alone with only Ember and Storm for company, and the isolation had been almost unbearable. But she had never given up hope that the prophecy would come true, and now that Jake had arrived, she finally felt like her sacrifice had meaning. Jake felt a deep sadness for what Luna had endured, and he promised her that she would never be alone again. Luna looked at him with such gratitude that it made his heart ache, and he realized that his feelings for her were growing stronger with each passing moment. The bond between them made it impossible to hide emotions, and he knew that Luna could feel what he was feeling. She did not pull away or seem uncomfortable, and instead, she moved closer to him and placed her hand on his arm. She told him that the bond often led to deeper connections between those who shared it, and it was natural for them to develop feelings for each other. But she also warned him that acting on those feelings would strengthen the bond even more and make it impossible for them to ever truly be apart. Jake said he understood the risks, but he did not care, and he had spent 14 years exploring the galaxy looking for something that he could not name. Now he knew what he had been searching for, and it had been Luna all along. Amy cleared her throat loudly and reminded them that they still had work to do. Jake and Luna both laughed and returned to the task of preparing for departure. By the time everything was loaded onto the ship, the crew was exhausted but excited about what they had discovered. Jake gave the order to lift off, and as the ship rose from the moon's surface, he looked back at the ancient structure that had been Luna's home for so long. She stood beside him on the bridge with Ember and Storm in their smaller forms at her feet, and she watched the moon disappear behind them. Jake asked if she was sad to leave, and Luna said she was relieved. She had done her duty and protected the treasure, and now she could finally move forward with her life. The journey back to Earth would take several months even with their fastest drives, and Jake knew that time would be crucial for preparing humanity. But he also knew that those months would give him the chance to learn more about Luna and to develop the bond they shared. As the ship entered the darkness between stars, Jake felt a sense of anticipation that he had not felt in years. The future was uncertain and filled with danger, but for the first time in his life he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Luna reached out and took his hand, and together they watched the stars streak past the windows. Behind them, Ember and Storm settled down for the long journey, and their presence was a constant reminder of the responsibility they had all accepted. The war was coming, but they would be ready. And with Luna's knowledge and humanity's determination, they would face the darkness together. 3 weeks into the journey back to Earth, Jake found himself spending every free moment with Luna, learning about the technology she had brought and about her people's history. The bond between them had grown stronger, and now they could sense each other's emotions even when they were in different parts of the ship. Luna was teaching him how to access the knowledge stored in the crystals, and Jake discovered that he could simply touch one, and information would flow directly into his mind. It was overwhelming at first because the amount of data was staggering, but Luna showed him how to filter and organize the information so it did not drive him crazy. One evening, Jake found Luna standing alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars, and he could feel through their bond that she was troubled. He approached quietly and stood beside her, waiting for her to speak. When she was ready, Luna finally turned to him and said that she was worried about how Earth's leaders would react to her arrival. She had lived long enough to know that humans could be both generous and suspicious, and bringing alien technology always caused political problems. Jake assured her that they would face whatever came together, and that his crew would vouch for her. But Luna shook her head and said it was not just about politics and she was worried about him. The bond they shared was making her care about him more deeply than she had cared about anyone since her family died, and that frightened her. She explained that elven bonds were permanent, and once fully formed they could never be broken. And if something happened to one person, the other would feel it. Jake took her hands in his and told her that he was not afraid of the bond. And in fact, he welcomed it. He said that in his 14 years of exploring space, he had never felt truly connected to anything until he met her. Luna searched his eyes looking for doubt or hesitation, but found only sincerity and determination. She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together watching the stars until Amy's voice over the intercom called Jake to the bridge. When Jake arrived at the bridge, Amy showed him a message that had just come through from Earth Command. They had received his initial report about the discovery on the moon, and they were demanding more details before the ship was allowed to approach. Jake had expected this, and he asked Luna to join him on the bridge so they could send a proper response. Luna arrived with Ember and Storm following behind her in their reduced size, and the crew members who had not yet gotten used to seeing dragons on the ship still stared in wonder. Jake recorded a detailed message explaining everything they had found, and introducing Luna as an ally who was bringing technology that could save humanity. He included footage of the crystal chamber and demonstrations of some of the simpler devices that Luna had already helped them build. The response from Earth Command came back faster than expected, and the tone was cautious but interested. They were cleared to approach Earth, but would be met by a military escort, and Luna would need to undergo extensive questioning before any technology transfer could begin. Luna accepted these terms gracefully and said she had expected nothing less. The remaining weeks of the journey were spent preparing for the arrival, and Luna worked with Jake and his crew to create presentations that would convince Earth's leaders of the threat they faced. She also began teaching Jake how to use some of the defensive technology so he could demonstrate it himself. One day during a training session, Jake successfully activated a personal shield using only his mind and the bond with Luna. The shield appeared as a shimmering dome of energy around him, and when Amy threw a wrench at him as a test, the object bounced off harmlessly. The entire crew cheered, and Jake felt Luna's pride and joy through their bond. Ember spoke into Jake's mind and said that he was learning faster than any human she had ever encountered, and his connection to Luna was amplifying his natural abilities. Storm added that Jake's determination was impressive and reminded him of the warriors from Luna's homeworld. As Earth finally came into view on the monitors, Jake felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was his home, but he knew that everything was about to change, not just for him but for all of humanity. Luna stood beside him, and he could feel her anxiety through the bond, and she had not set foot on a populated planet in 3 centuries. The military escort appeared as promised, and 6 heavily armed ships surrounded them, forming a protective formation. A stern voice came over the communications channel and ordered them to follow the escort to a secure military facility in orbit around the moon. Jake complied, and soon they were docking at a massive space station that served as Earth's first line of defense. As they prepared to disembark, Amy pulled Jake aside and told him to be careful. She said that politicians and military leaders would try to separate him from Luna and take control of the technology. Jake thanked her for the warning and promised to stay alert. When the airlock opened, they were met by a delegation of military officers and government officials, all wearing expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. The leader of the delegation was General Helen Carter, and she had a reputation for being tough but fair. She greeted Jake formally, and then her eyes moved to Luna and widened slightly at the sight of the elven princess. Luna stepped forward with grace and dignity and introduced herself in a clear voice. She explained that she came in peace and brought gifts that would help humanity survive the coming darkness. General Carter listened carefully, and then her gaze dropped to Ember and Storm, who were still in their smaller forms. She asked if those were really dragons, and Luna confirmed that they were her companions and protectors. The general ordered everyone to follow her to a secure conference room, and Jake noticed that they were surrounded by armed guards. Once inside the conference room, Luna was asked to explain everything. From the beginning, she spoke for over an hour, describing her people's history, and the enemy that had destroyed them, and the prophecy that had led her to wait for someone from Earth. She showed them crystal recordings of the destruction of elven worlds, and the faces of the officials grew grim as they watched. When she finished, there was a long silence before General Carter asked the question everyone was thinking. She wanted to know what Luna expected in return for sharing this technology. Luna's answer was simple, and she asked only for sanctuary and the chance to help humanity prepare for war. She said that she had already lost everything once, and could not bear to watch another civilization fall to the same enemy. Jake spoke up and vouched for Luna's sincerity, and he explained about the bond they shared and how it made deception impossible between them. Some of the officials looked skeptical, but General Carter seemed to accept his word. She said that Earth's leadership would need time to consider everything they had heard, and in the meantime Luna would be given quarters on the station, but would be under constant surveillance. Luna agreed to these terms without complaint, and Jake insisted on staying with her. The general allowed it, but made it clear that both of them were essentially under house arrest until decisions were made, as they were escorted to their quarters. Jake felt anger rising at being treated like prisoners after everything they had risked. Luna calmed him through their bond and reminded him that fear made people cautious and they needed to be patient. Their quarters were comfortable but clearly designed to contain them, and there were guards posted outside the door. Ember and Storm were not happy about the situation, and their mental voices carried a low growl of warning. Luna soothed them and explained that this was necessary to gain the humans' trust. Over the next few days, Jake and Luna were questioned repeatedly by different officials and scientists. They demonstrated the technology and answered thousands of questions, and slowly the skepticism began to fade. One scientist named Dr. Lisa Chen became particularly interested in the medical crystals, and Luna spent hours teaching her how to use them. Dr. Chen was amazed when she successfully healed a test subject's broken arm in minutes. Using the technology, word of the successful demonstration spread quickly, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know more about what Luna had brought. General Carter returned and informed them that Earth's Council had made a decision. They would accept Luna's offer and begin immediate integration of her technology into Earth's defenses. But there was a condition, and Jake would be placed in command of a new task force dedicated to preparing for the enemy's arrival. Luna would serve as his chief advisor, and together they would have access to whatever resources they needed. Jake accepted without hesitation, and Luna bowed her head in gratitude as they left the station to begin their new mission. Jake felt hope rising in his chest. Humanity had a chance now, and with Luna by his side, he believed they could overcome anything. The war was still coming, but they would be ready, and the bond between a human captain and an elven princess would be the foundation of Earth's defense. 6 months had passed since Jake and Luna began working together to prepare Earth's defenses, and the progress they made was beyond anyone's expectations. The new task force operated from a state-of-the-art facility that had been built specifically for integrating Luna's technology with human engineering. Jake stood in the command center watching dozens of screens showing construction projects across Earth's solar system, and defensive platforms were being built around every major planet and strategic location. Luna was beside him as always, and their bond had grown so strong that they often knew what the other was thinking without speaking. Amy had been promoted to second in command of the task force, and she was currently overseeing the installation of shield generators on Mars. The shields that Luna had designed could withstand incredible amounts of damage, and early tests showed they were even more effective than she had promised. Dr. Chen had made breakthroughs in medical technology that would revolutionize human healthcare, and diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were now curable. But the greatest achievement was the new generation of spacecraft that combined human innovation with elven knowledge. These ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything Earth had ever built, and they were armed with weapons that could actually hurt the enemy. Ember and Storm had been instrumental in the development process because their understanding of energy manipulation helped engineers solve problems that had seemed impossible. The Dragons had also been training human pilots in aerial combat, using techniques that had been developed over thousands of years. Jake watched as Storm flew alongside a formation of new fighters, and the Dragon's mental voice guided the pilots through complex maneuvers. The military had been skeptical at first about taking advice from a dragon, But after seeing the results, they became enthusiastic students. Luna touched Jake's arm and reminded him that they had a meeting with the council in an hour. He nodded, and they left the command center heading toward the transport that would take them to Earth's surface. The council meetings had become a regular part of their routine, and Jake had learned to navigate the political waters with Luna's help. General Carter had become one of their strongest allies, and she used her influence to cut through bureaucratic delays whenever possible as they traveled toward Earth. Jake reflected on how much his life had changed in just 6 months. He had gone from being a simple exploration captain to leading humanity's defense against an existential threat. But more than that, he had found something he never knew he was missing. And his connection with Luna had become the center of his world. Luna sensed his thoughts through their bond and smiled at him. She said that she felt the same way, and that these past months had been the happiest of her long life. When they arrived at the council chambers, they were greeted by General Carter, who looked troubled. She pulled them aside and told them that they had detected unusual activity at the edge of the solar system. Long-range sensors had picked up distortions in space-time that matched the signatures Luna had described for the enemy's ships. Jake felt his heart rate increase and asked how long they had before the enemy arrived. General Carter said that based on the data, they had perhaps 2 years, instead of the 5 that Luna had originally calculated. The enemy was moving faster than expected and might have detected the energy signatures from the technology Luna was sharing. Inside the council chambers, the mood was tense, and the leaders from every major nation were present, along with representatives from the military and scientific community. Jake gave them the latest status report on the defensive preparations, and Luna provided analysis of the enemy's likely approach vectors. The council asked difficult questions about whether they would be ready in time, and Jake answered honestly. He said that they had made incredible progress, but 2 years was not enough time to fortify everything they needed. To protect Luna added that they should focus their resources on protecting the most populated areas and the industrial centers that were producing the new technology. One council member asked if there was any way to negotiate with the enemy or avoid conflict altogether. Luna's expression became sad, and she explained that her people had tried negotiation and diplomacy and reason. The enemy did not communicate and did not negotiate, and they simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on. The only option was to be strong enough to stop them or be prepared to evacuate as many people as possible. The council debated for hours about resource allocation and priorities, and Jake felt his patience wearing thin. Finally, General Carter stood and said that they were wasting time with debate when they should be taking action. She proposed, giving Jake and Luna complete authority over the defensive preparations without requiring council approval for every decision. The motion was seconded, and after a tense vote, it passed with a narrow majority. Jake was relieved, but also felt the weight of the responsibility that had just been placed on his shoulders. Luna reassured him through their bond that they would face this challenge together, just like they had faced everything else. After the meeting, they returned to the facility and immediately called a strategy session with their top advisors. Amy suggested that they should start training civilians in evacuation procedures and basic combat skills. Dr. Chen recommended establishing medical stations throughout the solar system that could treat mass casualties. The head of engineering proposed accelerating the construction schedule, even if it meant cutting some safety margins. Jake listened to all the suggestions and then made his decisions quickly and decisively. They would implement all of the proposals and push everyone to work harder and faster. Luna added that they should also begin recruiting and training more people to use the bonding technology. She explained that humans who bonded with the crystals could access the knowledge more quickly and effectively. Jake asked if the bonding process was safe for humans, and Luna said that it carried some risks, but the benefits far outweighed them. Over the next few months, the pace of work became almost frantic, and everyone in the task force was putting in long hours. Jake and Luna barely slept, and when they did, it was often in chairs at the command center. Their bond kept them connected even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, and they drew strength from each other. Ember and Storm were also working tirelessly, and the dragons had taken it upon themselves to patrol the outer solar system, watching for any signs of the enemy's approach. One night, Jake woke from a brief nap to find Luna standing at the window looking out at Earth. He could feel through their bond that she was worried about something deeper than just the coming war. He went to her and asked what was troubling her. Luna turned to him with tears in her eyes and said that she was afraid of losing him. He explained that in all her long life she had learned not to become attached to things because everything eventually ended. But with Jake it was different, and the bond made it impossible not to care deeply, and the thought of him being hurt or killed in the coming war was unbearable. Jake pulled her into his arms and held her close. He told her that he was not going anywhere, and that they would survive this together. Luna looked up at him and said that she loved him, and it was the first time she had spoken those words in over 300 years. Jake's heart swelled, and he told her that he loved her too, and that nothing in the universe would keep them apart. They kissed, and in that moment, their bond flared with such intensity that Ember and Storm both sent waves of approval through the mental connection. The next morning, Jake and Luna returned to work with renewed determination. The enemy was coming, but they had something worth fighting for, and their love had become a source of strength that neither had expected. Amy noticed the change in them immediately, and she smiled knowingly. She told Jake that love made people fight harder, and that the crew had been waiting for him and Luna to finally admit their feelings. Jake laughed and said it was that obvious. Amy replied that anyone with eyes could see the way they looked at each other. As the months continued to pass, the defensive preparations reached completion on the most critical systems. The shield networks were online, and the new fleet of ships was ready for combat, and thousands of personnel had been trained in using Luna's technology. Jake stood in the command center one final time before the enemy's arrival and looked at everything they had accomplished. Luna stood beside him and their hands were clasped together. Ember and Storm were on the observation deck in their full size. Watching the stars, General Carter approached and told them that long-range sensors had confirmed the enemy fleet's position. They would arrive in less than a week. Jake felt fear trying to creep in, but he pushed it away and focused on the confidence that Luna's presence gave him. He gave the order to bring all defensive systems to full readiness and to recall all ships to their designated positions. The message went out across the entire solar system, and millions of people prepared for the battle that would determine humanity's fate. Luna squeezed his hand and reminded him that they had done everything possible to prepare. Now, they would see if it was enough. Jake looked at her and said that regardless of what happened, he was grateful for the time they had shared. Luna smiled and told him that their story was not over yet. Together, they would face the darkness, and together, they would find a way to prevail. The final countdown had begun, and Earth's defenders waited with hope and determination for the enemy to arrive. The enemy fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system exactly when Luna's calculations predicted, and their ships were massive dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Jake watched the sensor displays with a mixture of fear and determination as hundreds of enemy vessels moved toward Earth in perfect formation. Luna stood beside him at the command center, and through their bond he could feel her ancient memories of the last time she had faced this enemy. The entire task force was at battle stations, and every defensive platform had been activated, and the new human fleet waited in strategic positions throughout the solar system. General Carter's voice came through the communication system ordering all forces to hold position until the enemy came within range. Jake gave the signal to Ember and Storm, who were positioned near the outer defensive line, and the dragons acknowledged with mental roars that echoed through the bond. The enemy fleet did not slow or attempt communication, and they simply advanced with mechanical precision toward their targets. When they crossed into weapons range, Jake gave the order to open fire. Thousands of energy beams and missiles streaked across space toward the enemy ships, and the battle that would decide humanity's fate had begun. The new weapons that Luna had designed proved their worth immediately, and several enemy ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. But there were so many of them, and for every ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. The enemy returned fire, and their weapons were devastating dark beams that punched through shields and armor like they were paper. Jake watched in horror as one of the outer defensive platforms was hit and exploded, killing everyone aboard. Luna gripped his hand and reminded him that they had expected losses and they needed to stay focused on the strategy. The human fleet engaged the enemy at close range, and the pilots who had trained with Storm showed incredible skill dodging enemy fire and striking at weak points. Ember flew directly into the enemy formation, breathing fire that was hot enough to melt their hull plating, and the dragon's roars of challenge could be heard across all communication channels. Storm used his ice breath to freeze enemy weapon systems and disable ships without destroying them. And Jake made a mental note to capture one of those ships later. For study, Amy coordinated the defense from her position on Mars, and she kept the shield generators running at maximum capacity, even when they started to overheat. Dr. Chen worked frantically at one of the medical stations, treating wounded personnel as they were evacuated from damaged ships. The battle raged for hours, and Jake felt exhaustion creeping in, but Luna's presence through their bond kept him alert and focused. The enemy seemed endless, but gradually, Jake noticed that their advance was slowing. The shields were holding better than expected, and the human ships were starting to work together in coordinated strike patterns that overwhelmed enemy defenses. Luna pointed out that the enemy had never faced organized resistance before, and they were not adapting to the new tactics. Jake saw an opportunity and ordered a bold maneuver. He sent half the fleet to feint an attack on the enemy's left flank, while the other half prepared to strike at the center of their formation. The enemy took the bait and shifted their forces to counter the feint, leaving their center vulnerable. Jake gave the signal, and the second group of ships, along with Ember and Storm, hit the enemy's center with everything they had. The coordinated strike broke through the enemy's formation and created chaos in their ranks. For the first time since the battle began, the enemy fleet showed signs of confusion. Luna's eyes widened, and she said that this had never happened before, and the enemy had always maintained perfect coordination. Jake pressed the advantage and ordered all forces to focus fire on the disrupted center. The human fleet poured everything they had into the gap, and enemy ships began falling back in disarray. But then something changed, and the enemy fleet suddenly stopped advancing and began to regroup. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he watched them form a new defensive pattern. Luna gasped, and through their bond, Jake felt her recognition of what was happening. She said that the enemy had learned from the battle and were adapting their tactics, and this was something her people had never witnessed before. The enemy counterattack came with renewed ferocity, and this time they targeted the shield generators specifically. Jake realized that they had studied Earth's defenses during the first engagement and now knew where to strike for maximum effect. He ordered all shields to rotate frequencies to make them harder to target, but the enemy adjusted almost immediately. The situation was becoming desperate, and Jake could see that they were losing ground. Then Ember's voice filled his mind with an urgent message. The dragon said that she and Storm had found something, and the enemy ships all seemed to be receiving commands from a single large vessel in the rear of their formation. If that command ship could be destroyed, the rest of the fleet might lose coordination. Jake immediately saw the possibility and ordered a strike team to form up on the dragons. Luna insisted on going with them, and Jake knew better than to argue with her. He assigned Amy to command the defense while he led the strike personally. The team consisted of 20 of the best pilots along with Jake's own ship, and Luna was with him on the bridge. Ember and Storm led the way, burning and freezing a path through the enemy fleet toward the command ship. The enemy tried to stop them, but the dragons were too fast and too powerful. Jake's strike team followed in their wake, and several ships were hit, but they pressed forward. The command ship was enormous and covered in weapons, but it seemed to have minimal shielding, as if it had relied on the rest of the fleet for protection. Luna prepared the most powerful weapon they had, and a crystal-based energy cannon that could pierce almost any defense as they approached the command ship. The enemy seemed to realize what was happening, and dozens of ships broke off their attacks to intercept Storm, created a massive ice barrier that bought them precious seconds. Ember breathed a wall of fire that incinerated the closest enemy ships. Yaunk brought his ship into position, and Luna activated the cannon. The energy beam that erupted from their ship was blinding, and it struck the command ship dead center. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the entire vessel began to break apart from the inside. The explosion was massive, and the shockwave knocked several nearby ships off course, and then something incredible happened, and the entire enemy fleet stopped moving. Without the command ship directing them, the enemy vessels seemed lost and confused. Jake ordered all forces to press the attack, and the human fleet surged forward. The enemy ships began to retreat, but without coordination, they were easy targets. Within hours, the battle was over, and the surviving enemy ships fled back to wherever they had come from. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing, and they had won. Luna collapsed in her chair and tears streamed down her face. She said that her people had never found a way to defeat the enemy, and humanity had accomplished, in one battle, what the elven civilization could not do in years of fighting. Jake felt overwhelming relief and gratitude wash over him. Through their bond, he shared this moment with Luna and with Ember and Storm. The dragons roared their victory, and the sound was picked up by every communication channel in the solar system. Humanity celebrated, and people in every city on Earth and every colony in the solar system rejoiced at the news. General Carter contacted Jake personally to congratulate him, and she said that he and Luna had saved not just Earth but possibly the entire galaxy. The casualties had been heavy, and thousands had died defending their home, but Earth had survived, and humanity had proven that they could stand against any threat. Jake returned to the command center where Amy had organized the victory, and she hugged him tightly. Dr. Chen was there too, and she said that the wounded were being treated, and that the medical technology Luna provided had saved countless lives. Over the next few weeks, the cleanup and rebuilding began. Jake and Luna worked together to analyze the captured enemy technology, and they discovered that the enemy was not a natural species, but rather machines created by a long-dead civilization. Machines had been programmed to eliminate all life, but they had never been given the ability to truly adapt or learn. Humanity's victory had been possible because humans could think creatively and adapt faster than the machines could process. Luna said that this was why the prophecy had pointed to humans, and their ability to innovate under pressure was unique. In the galaxy, Jake asked what would happen now, and Luna said that they needed to prepare because there might be other machine fleets out there. But she also said that humanity had proven themselves ready to take their place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. Jake looked at Luna and realized that their journey together was just beginning. They had saved Earth, but now they had an entire galaxy to explore and protect. Luna smiled and said that she had waited 300 years for a companion, and now she had found not just a companion, but a love that would last forever. Jake pulled her close and kissed her, and around them the command center staff politely looked away. Ember and Storm landed on the observation deck, and the dragons sent waves of contentment through the bond. The war was over, but the adventure was just beginning, and together, Jake and Luna would face whatever came next. They had proven that love and determination could overcome any obstacle, and that humanity's spirit was truly unstoppable.